Welcome to another LudoKit Devlog. Today we're talking about 0.0.41, and specifically we are talking about contributor links. And this is the big new feature of the most recent few versions of LudoKit. And the idea here is you have these other ways that you can add contributors to your credits. You can, if you got members of your organization who should be credited, which is going to be typically the case, you can just directly add them. This is all happening in a test version, so I don't have any of the org members, but the idea is you would see your org members here. You can select them, add some initial roles, and add them that way. Very slick, just happens right out of the gate. You can also add people by email, so you can plop in a big sheet of email addresses and then add them that way, and then LudoKit will do all the work for you of sending emails to people, getting them onboarded into LudoKit, doing all that kind of stuff. But the moment that you add them, they'll appear in your credits. And you can already start editing their stuff, so that way if they don't want to collaborate and help you make all that stuff work, they technically don't have to. They can still make you do all of it. But no, that gives them the option of then signing into LudoKit, using that same email address, basically claiming that credit, and then they now are able to manage it themselves. Within reason, because again, this all of the credit stuff goes through an approval process, so even if somebody says, ooh, I have these other 5 roles that I think make sense for me, then those wouldn't appear in your exported credits until you approve them. When you're looking at your credits page, you'll see that it needs approval, and so ultimately you still control how everybody shows up. All right, so you got these ways. I guess I should also mention we've also had this managed mechanism. So this is the idea if you need to add people to your credits sort of non-collaboratively. And this could be for extra privacy, where you don't want to share someone's email address with LudoKit, or they don't want you to. We have a very robust privacy policy because we don't want to do anything weird with your data, but some people that's not sufficient, and that's fine. So the mechanism to support that is that you don't give LudoKit any info. You just say, here's the name this person or entity should be credited under. This is also useful for cases like you want to credit an organization, or you want to add like an in memoriam for somebody who has passed away during your dev cycle. That kind of stuff where it makes sense to not have a sort of contact person. So that's what this thing is for. So you got these kind of ways of you doing the work of adding contributors to your credits. This is a lot of overhead for you. You got to keep track of all this stuff. Got to remember who to add. You got to make sure everybody did get in there. It puts all the responsibility on you to make sure that this stuff happens. So the more recent feature is this adding people by contributor link. And the idea of this is that you create a link to let people add themselves to a particular team. Give it a name so that you can tell what this is for. That way you can delete it at some point if you want to, or at least you know who made it and what its purpose is supposed to be. Optional expiration. This is useful just to make sure you don't have these stray links out in the wild, because anybody with this link can technically add themselves to the credits. However, you can always delete a link, and then it'll stop letting people use it to add themselves to the credits. And anybody who gets added to your credits, you can always delete. So you'll want to be careful with them, because you don't want to deal with the overhead of, you letting a link get loose into the wild, and then now you have to go delete 100 people, 100 weirdos who added themselves to your credits. But mostly the idea is you can post this somewhere relatively secure for your team or for some external party. So say you're working with a localization company, you want to make sure that everybody on that team gets credited. You can now just share a link with the project manager from that team that they can then share with all the people who worked on your project. They can add themselves, they can select the roles that feel like they make sense, they can do all that stuff, and then you can basically double check it and edit it afterwards. Rather than you having to keep track of, I got the spreadsheet from them, how do I convert this into a bunch of invites, or manually do it or whatever. It lets you just bypass all that. So this is also useful for things like public beta testing. If you want to add community playtesters to your credits, again, you don't want to be responsible for collecting all of their email addresses and managing all of that. If instead you can just say wherever you're managing the playtest, just post a link and say, hey, add yourself. Right. So that's the purpose of this thing. You can specify the initial roles for this as well, and you'll usually want to, because the main reason you're going to be doing this is because you're going to share a link with a particular group of people because they have some relationship to the game in terms of stuff that they were doing. But these are your initial roles. So once they've added themselves to the credits, they can go make changes to how they want to be contribute, or how they want to be attributed attributed for their roles. And again, you can always also override that. You can accept what they request, or you can make further changes and so on. So that's the idea. So you can make one of these links. Once you get a link, then you just copy it, and then you can just share it with somebody. And that's it. Basically, LudoKit does all the work for you of when somebody follows that link, it tells them what to do. So people who use that link will have to set up a LudoKit account for it to work. And the idea is that if you're logged in with LudoKit account and you've got one of these contributor links, then you just can add yourself to the credits. And so for a user who has done this and is managing their own credits, right, then they're going to find their credits currently in the accounts page. Then they might go somewhere else at some point. But so this is this is all test data, so none of it's real. But you can see, like, I've got this list of all these fake game credits that I've got during testing. And so a regular user would basically have access to this page. They'd be able to manage their account. They'd be able to make changes to how they want to appear in credits pages. And so that's the whole benefit of allowing the self-service element of this, is that if somebody changes their name, which does happen, especially over the course of a game's development, if somebody changes their name, or if something is just incorrect with how you specified their name, or if somebody's role has changed, or whatever, right? All these kinds of things can happen over the life cycle of a game. The idea is that now the people that you've credited can just manage that stuff themselves. So that's the links system. And that basically wraps up the core mechanisms that LudoKit intends to have for how people get added to and how they manage their credits, and then how you as a manager interact with those as well. So if I'm looking at somebody's credit, then it'll give a summary of things that are wrong with it or things I need to check or whatever, and I can, again, make edits. I can add a little note about why I made the changes I made, that kind of stuff. So there's a whole loop here allowing you and somebody who is a contributor to sort of bounce changes back and forth as needed, but ultimately giving you, as the credits manager, ultimate authority as deciding how things show up. So all that stuff that we intend to have in here is in here. The stuff that's now left for the credits feature of LudoKit is the localization side, which is us pre-localizing role names and pre-roll credit titles and other kinds of stuff so that you don't have to. And then exports, so that all of the data that's in here can actually be exported for use in game. And so that wraps this new issue of LudoKit Devlog. We'll be hopefully talking about credits localization and exports in the next one.